When I first met Hannah, I was sure I'd found the one. We were both in our late 20s, full of dreams and ambition. She was everything I had ever wanted, smart, funny, and beautiful in a way that made the room stop when she walked in. I was working as a project manager for a construction firm back then, saving every penny to build a future for us. Hannah worked as a graphic designer, and we bonded over our shared goal of creating something stable, something permanent. We got married 2 years after we started dating. It was a small ceremony, just close friends and family, and though we didn't have much, we were happy. At least, I thought we were. The first couple of years flew by in a haze of honeymoon bliss. We bought a small house in a quiet neighborhood in Columbus, Ohio. It wasn't much, but it was ours, and I loved every inch of it. Weekends were spent painting the walls, building furniture from scratch, and dreaming about the family we'd eventually raise there. But somewhere along the way, things began to shift. At first, the changes were subtle, barely noticeable. Hannah stopped greeting me at the door when I came home from work, something she used to do with a huge smile and a kiss. She started working late more often, her deadlines seemingly endless. When I brought it up, she'd shrug and say, "That's just the industry." I believed her. I wanted to believe her. Then there were the withdrawals from our joint account. I checked the balance and noticed several $100s missing without any explanation. When I asked her about it, she waved it off, saying it was for work expenses or gifts for family. But the excuses didn't always add up. I try not to make a big deal out of it. After all, it wasn't like we were struggling to pay the bills yet. The turning point came one Friday evening. I had planned a surprise date night for us, something we hadn't done in months. I booked a table at her favorite Italian restaurant and even bought her a small bouquet of sunflowers, her favorite. But when I got home, I found a note on the kitchen counter. "Working late. Don't wait up." That was it. No apology, no promise to make it up to me. Just a few cold words scribbled on a piece of paper. I stared at the note for what felt like hours, the flowers wilting in my hands. I wish I could say that was the moment I realized something was wrong, but it wasn't. I was too naive, too blinded by the life I thought we had. The weeks that followed were a blur of avoidance and tension. Hannah spent more and more nights away from home, and when she was there, it was like she wasn't really present. She'd sit on the couch, scrolling through her phone, barely acknowledging me or our conversations. The intimacy between us vanished almost overnight. She no longer reached for my hand when we walked together, no longer kissed me goodnight. I tried to talk to her about it, but every time I brought up my concerns, she'd turn it back on me. "You're overthinking things, Matt," she'd say with an exasperated sigh. "I'm just tired. Work's been crazy." I wanted to believe her, so I did. I convinced myself that this was just a rough patch, that we'd get through it like couples always do. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. Then came the accusations. Out of nowhere, Hannah started accusing me of being distant, of not caring about her or our marriage. It was almost laughable, considering how hard I was trying to keep us afloat, emotionally and financially. She claimed I was too focused on work, that I wasn't paying enough attention to her. The irony wasn't lost on me. Our arguments became more frequent, and each one left me feeling more drained than the last. It was like I couldn't do anything right in her eyes. If I worked late, I was neglecting her. If I came home early, I was smothering her. The worst part was how it started to affect our son, Ethan. He was only 4 at the time, too young to understand what was happening, but old enough to sense the tension. He'd ask me why Mommy was always tired or why she didn't play with him as much anymore. I didn't have the heart to tell him the truth. I didn't even know what the truth was. One night, after yet another argument that ended with Hannah storming out of the house, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the blank TV screen. Ethan was asleep upstairs, and the silence was deafening. I felt like a failure, as a husband, as a father, as a man. It wasn't supposed to be like this. We were supposed to be happy, to build a life together. But the more I tried to hold on, the more it felt like I was grasping at smoke. That night, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't let this break me. No matter what was going on with Hannah, I'd do whatever it took to protect Ethan and give him the stability he deserved. I just didn't realize how far things had already unraveled. The weekend after that argument, Hannah suggested we take Ethan to the zoo. It was a rare moment of her trying to spend time together as a family, and I jumped at the chance, hoping it was a sign things were improving. At the zoo, she seemed like her old self, laughing with Ethan as he pointed excitedly at the elephants and mimicked the monkeys. For a few hours, I let myself believe everything was okay. But when Ethan fell asleep in his car seat on the drive home, her demeanor shifted. She stared out the window, her face blank and distant, as though the day had drained every ounce of energy she had. I tried to break the silence. "You seemed happy today," I said, glancing at her. She gave a small shrug, still looking out the window. "It was nice to get out." I pushed a little further. "Maybe we can do this more often. Spend more time together as a family." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I'll try." That was all she said. And just like that, the wall between us felt higher than ever. The following weeks were a roller coaster of hope and disappointment. Some days, Hannah seemed like she was trying, cooking dinner, spending time with Ethan, even curling up on the couch next to me while we watched TV. But those moments never lasted. One Saturday night, I woke up to an empty bed. At first, I thought maybe she was in the bathroom, but when I checked, the light was off and the door was open. I walked downstairs to find her sitting on the couch, her phone glowing in the dark. "Hannah," I called softly, not wanting to startle her. She jumped slightly and locked her phone, shoving it under a pillow. "You scared me," she said, her voice shaky. "Sorry," I said, sitting down next to her. "What are you doing up?" "Couldn't sleep," she said quickly, avoiding my eyes. Her response felt off, but I didn't press. I told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining things. But as the days passed, her late nights became more frequent. I started noticing other things, too. She always seemed glued to her phone, smiling at texts she never mentioned. Whenever I walked into the room, she'd tilt the screen away or lock it altogether. One night, while she was in the shower, I couldn't stop myself. Her phone was sitting on the nightstand, buzzing softly with a new message. I hesitated, my heart pounding. I'd never invaded her privacy before, but something inside me, call it instinct, told me I needed to see what was going on. I unlocked her phone using the passcode I'd seen her enter 100 times. At first, everything looked normal. Texts from her coworkers, notifications from social media. But then I saw a name I didn't recognize, Chris. The most recent message sent chills down my spine. "I can't stop thinking about last night. When can we meet again?" I stared at the screen, my mind racing. The thread was full of messages like that, flirty, suggestive, intimate. I read as much as I could before the sound of the shower turning off snapped me out of it. Quickly, I locked the phone and put it back on the nightstand. My heart was pounding so loudly, I was sure she could hear it as she walked into the room. "Everything okay?" she asked, toweling off her hair. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Just checking my emails." She didn't seem to notice anything was wrong, but I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Over the next few days, I became hyper-aware of everything Hannah did. Every text she sent, every late night at work, every unexplained expense. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. One night, while she was out working late, I called her office pretending to be a client. The receptionist sounded confused. "Hannah left hours ago," she said. "Can I take a message for her?" I hung up without saying another word. That was the confirmation I didn't want but desperately needed. She wasn't working late. She was with him. The betrayal hit me like a freight train. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything but the thought of her with someone else. And yet, I said nothing. I needed proof, real proof. Something she couldn't deny or explain away. So, I started keeping track. I checked her phone whenever I could, noting the time she texted Chris and the dates they planned to meet. I saved screenshots of their messages, even though it felt like a knife to my chest every time I read them. One Saturday afternoon, while Hannah was out running errands, I logged into our bank account and saw several transactions I couldn't explain. Expensive dinners, hotel bookings, charges for rideshare services. It all painted a picture I couldn't ignore. I felt sick, angry, devastated, but most of all, I felt like a fool. I had trusted her with everything, and this was how she repaid me? Still, I didn't confront her. Not yet. I wanted to catch her in the act. I needed to see it with my own eyes. The opportunity, came sooner than I expected. One evening, after she left for another late night at work, I followed her. I felt like a stalker, hiding in my car a few blocks away from her office. But instead of going to work, she drove across town to a small boutique hotel. I parked a safe distance away and watched as she got out of the car, her hair perfectly done, her dress hugging her curves in a way that made my stomach churn. A man was waiting for her at the entrance. Tall, well-dressed, and far too comfortable touching my wife. He leaned in, kissed her cheek, and led her inside. I sat there for what felt like hours, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they hurt. Part of me wanted to burst in there and confront them on the spot. But another part of me, stronger, calmer, knew I had to wait. Because this wasn't just about me. It was about Ethan, about our future, about everything I had worked so hard to build. I wasn't going to let her destroy it without a fight. The next morning, I woke up before Hannah. She was still curled up under the blankets, her hair sprawled across the pillow. To anyone else, she would have looked peaceful, innocent. But I knew better now. I couldn't stand being in the same room. I got up, made breakfast for Ethan, and tried to distract myself with his chatter about dinosaurs and superheroes. But my mind was elsewhere, reliving the scene from last night, her laughing and kissing another man like our marriage didn't even exist. When Hannah finally came downstairs, she was all smiles, acting as though nothing was wrong. "Morning," she said, leaning down to kiss Ethan on the forehead. She didn't even glance at me. I couldn't bring myself to respond. I just sat there, drinking my coffee and pretending to read the news on my phone. That evening, after I put Ethan to bed, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. The anger, the betrayal, it was all too much to hold in. I needed answers. Hannah was in the living room, scrolling through her phone when I walked in. "We need to talk," I said, my voice colder than I intended. She looked up, startled. "About what?" I sat down across from her, my heart pounding. "About where you were last night." Her expression faltered for a split second before she recovered, plastering on an innocent smile. "I told you. I was working late." "Don't lie to me," I said, my voice rising. "I followed you, Hannah. I saw you with him." Her face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Stop it," I snapped, standing up. "I saw you at the hotel. I saw him kiss you. I know everything, Hannah. The texts, the dinners, the lies. It's all out in the open now." She sat there, frozen, her phone slipping from her hands. For a moment, she didn't say anything, and I wondered if she was going to deny it again. But then, she buried her face in her hands and started to cry. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice muffled. "I didn't mean for this to happen." "You didn't mean for what to happen?" I demanded. "To cheat on me? To destroy our family? What exactly didn't you mean to do, Hannah?" She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "It wasn't supposed to go this far. I was unhappy, okay? I felt like we were drifting apart, like you didn't see me anymore." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "So, your solution was to sleep with someone else?" "It wasn't just about that," she said defensively. "Chris made me feel alive again. He made me feel like I mattered. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And I didn't? The man who's been by your side for years, who gave you everything, who helped you raise our son. That wasn't enough for you." She didn't answer. She just sat there, crying and shaking her head. The rest of the night was a blur of shouting, accusations, and tears. Hannah kept apologizing, saying she didn't want to lose me, that she'd end things with Chris and do whatever it took to fix our marriage. But her words felt hollow. How could I trust her after everything she'd done? I slept on the couch that night, staring at the ceiling and wondering where it all went wrong. The next morning, Hannah was up early, making breakfast like nothing had happened. But the tension between us was unbearable. Even Ethan seemed to sense it, asking why I didn't sit next to Mommy at the table. I didn't know what to tell him. How do you explain something like this to a child? Hannah tried to talk to me after he went to school, but I wasn't ready. I needed time to think, to process everything, so I spent the day driving around aimlessly, replaying every moment of our marriage in my head. Every fight, every laugh, every promise we made to each other. By the time I got home, I had made a decision. That night, I sat Hannah down in the living room. "I've thought about what you said." I began, my voice steady but firm. And I can't just forgive and forget. You broke my trust, and that's not something we can fix overnight. Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. I understand. I'm willing to go to counseling, I continued. But only if you cut all ties with Chris. No more texts, no more calls, nothing. If I find out you've been in contact with him, we're done. Do you understand me? Yes, she said quickly. I'll block him. I'll do whatever it takes. I didn't know if I believed her, but it was the best I could do for now. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Counseling helped us talk through our issues, but the damage was done. Every time Hannah touched her phone, every time she was late coming home, I felt the familiar sting of doubt. I wanted to believe her when she said she was committed to fixing our marriage. But part of me couldn't shake the feeling that she was still hiding something. And then one day, I found out I was right. Things had started to feel almost normal again, or at least as normal as they could be after everything. Hannah was making an effort. She deleted Chris's number in front of me, started leaving her phone on the counter instead of clutching it like a lifeline, and even suggested date nights to rebuild what we lost. I was cautious, but I wanted to believe her. For Ethan's sake, I needed to believe her. But deep down, I couldn't shake the gnawing sense that something was still off. It all unraveled one rainy Thursday afternoon. Ethan was at a friend's house, and I was working from home. Hannah had said she was going to run errands, but she'd been gone for hours. When her phone buzzed on the counter, I froze. She never left it behind. Never. I stared at the screen, torn between the man who wanted to respect her privacy and the man who needed to know the truth. The message preview was enough to tip the scales. Hey, can't wait to see you again. Last night was amazing. My stomach dropped. My hands trembled as I unlocked the phone. She told me the password during counseling, part of her commitment to transparency. The messages confirmed everything I feared. Chris was back. She hadn't just lied to me. She'd gone behind my back again. Their texts were all there. Plans to meet up, sweet nothings, even photos. The woman who promised to cut him out of her life was still sneaking around with him. And worse, one of the photos was time-stamped from the night before. That was when it hit me like a freight train. She hadn't changed. All her promises, all her tears, they were just an act to keep me around. I was done. When she got home, drenched from the rain, I was waiting for her. Busy day? I asked, my voice icy. She blinked, caught off guard. Yeah. Traffic was bad. Sure it wasn't Chris keeping you? Her face turned white. What are you talking about? I held up her phone. The damning messages pulled up on the screen. This. You promised me, Hannah. You swore you'd end it with him. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel sympathy this time. I felt rage. I can explain. Don't. I snapped, cutting her off. I gave you a chance. I was willing to work through this for our family, for Ethan. But you? You couldn't even give me honesty. You couldn't even try. She broke down, sobbing. I'm sorry. I don't know what's wrong with me. No. I interrupted, my voice shaking with anger. You don't get to play the victim here. You destroyed this. Not me. You. That night, I packed a bag and left. I stayed with a friend for a while, giving myself space to think. Over the next few weeks, I started making arrangements. I spoke to a lawyer, got advice on custody, and prepared for the inevitable fallout. Hannah begged me to come home, to give her another chance, but I was done listening to her lies. Ethan was my only priority now. The final straw came a month later when I was picking Ethan up from Hannah's house. Chris was there. He was standing in the doorway like he belonged there, like he was stepping into the role I had vacated. And the way Hannah looked at him, like she didn't even care that I was watching, made it clear she'd already moved on. It hurt more than I wanted to admit, but it also made me realize something. I deserved better. That night, I sat Ethan down and told him the truth in the gentlest way I could. Mommy and Daddy aren't going to live together anymore, I said, holding his tiny hands in mine. But we both love you so much, and that's never going to change. He cried, and it broke my heart. But I promised myself I'd be the best father I could be, no matter what. Hannah and I finalized the divorce a few months later. She stayed with Chris, and I got shared custody of Ethan. It wasn't the life I'd envisioned when we said our vows, but it was better than living a lie. And as hard as it was to start over, I knew I'd made the right choice. The first few months after the divorce felt like navigating a maze in the dark. I'd go to bed in an empty apartment, haunted by the echoes of a life I no longer had. Nights were the hardest, quiet and relentless. Every little thing seemed to remind me of Hannah. The sound of the creaky floor in the kitchen, the faint smell of her favorite shampoo lingering on Ethan's pillow. It was all there, like a ghost refusing to leave. Sometimes, I'd scroll through old photos on my phone, torturing myself with memories of a time when I thought everything was perfect. Hannah laughing at one of my dumb jokes, Ethan's first steps, our family vacations. At first, it felt like I was losing all of it. But then I realized something important. I hadn't lost everything. I still had Ethan, and he needed me more than ever. Ethan became my anchor. Every laugh, every hug, every time he asked me to play catch or help him build a Lego set reminded me that I still had purpose. He was my reason to get out of bed in the morning, my motivation to push through the pain. We started new traditions, just the two of us. Friday night pizza and movies, Saturday trips to the park, and Sunday morning pancakes. I wanted him to feel loved, to feel safe, even if his world had changed. But rebuilding wasn't easy. There were days when I felt like I was barely holding it together. Watching Ethan pack his overnight bag to stay at Hannah's new place was like ripping off a scab that hadn't fully healed. The thought of him spending time with her and Chris, their shiny new life together, made my stomach churn. The first time I saw them together after the divorce was at one of Ethan's soccer games. They sat together on the bleachers, looking every bit the happy couple. Chris had his arm casually draped over her shoulder, and they were laughing at something one of the other parents said. For a moment, I felt that familiar surge of anger and bitterness. But then I looked at Ethan, running around the field with a huge smile on his face, and something shifted in me. It wasn't about them anymore. It was about him. When the game ended, Ethan sprinted over to me, his face flushed with excitement. "Did you see my goal, Dad?" "I did, buddy," I said, pulling him into a hug. "You were amazing out there." And just like that, the knot in my chest loosened. They could have their picture-perfect image. I had something better. I had my son. Time moved on, and so did I. Slowly, the sting of betrayal faded into the background. I focused on work, on staying healthy, and most importantly, on being the best dad I could be. One day, I decided to take a step I'd been avoiding for months. I signed up for a gym membership. At first, it was just about finding a way to burn off the stress. But as I kept going, I started feeling stronger. Not just physically, but mentally too. Rediscovering myself was a slow process. I started reading again, something I hadn't done in years. I picked up a new hobby, photography, and found joy in capturing the small, beautiful moments around me. And then, one day, something unexpected happened. Her name was Emily. She was Ethan's art teacher, and we met at a parent-teacher conference. She was warm, approachable, and had a way of making people feel at ease. At first, our conversations were casual, mostly about Ethan and his love for drawing. But over time, we started talking about other things. Movies, books, life in general. One day, after a school event, she asked if I wanted to grab a coffee. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I was ready to let someone new into my life. But something about her felt different, safe. That coffee turned into a 2-hour conversation, and before I knew it, we were seeing each other regularly. Emily didn't just care about me. She cared about Ethan too. She'd help him with his art projects, cheer him on at his games, and listen patiently as he told her about his favorite superheroes. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't just surviving, I was living. The day I introduced Emily to my parents was a big moment for me. I worried they'd think it was too soon, or that they'd be hesitant after everything that had happened. But their reaction surprised me. "She's wonderful," my mom said after Emily left. "You deserve to be happy, and she clearly makes you happy." And she did. As for Hannah, we kept things civil for Ethan's sake. She and Chris eventually got married, though from what I heard through the grapevine, their relationship wasn't as perfect as it seemed. But that wasn't my concern anymore. One evening, as Emily and I sat on the couch watching Ethan build a Lego tower on the floor, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The betrayal, the pain, the heartbreak, they were all part of my story. But they didn't define me. What defined me was the man I became after it all. The father who put his son first, the person who learned to trust again, and the man who refused to let the past keep him from building a better future. As I looked around the room, at Emily's warm smile, at Ethan's determined concentration as he stacked one Lego piece on top of another, I realized something. I was happy, and that's how my story ends. Not with bitterness or regret, but with hope. Because sometimes life breaks you down just to show you how strong you can be. And in the end, I found something I thought I'd lost forever: myself.